Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. Today, we're excited to be joined by Emilie Lalibertè, a manager at Miebach Consulting, who'll be talking with us about how companies can support women in our industry. Welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, Emilie.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited about our topic today, but first, let's take a break from supply chain stuff and just get to know you a little bit more. So, you and I started Miebach at about the same time, but we have both had some interesting job histories. You have a really cool job on your CV. You took time away from consulting and engineering and went to South America.
Yes, so I was working for Accenture in system implementation, and I always wanted to kind of learn a bit more about nonprofit organization and kind of give back of my time. So I started to work for a nonprofit organization in Canada, but that was affiliated with the ONG in Peru. And so I moved there for 9 months. And one of my projects was to develop a training or overall a program to help small entrepreneur to kind of help them have a more efficient or more formalized business. And it was really interesting because we had 15 producers that we had selected from milk, vegetable, fish farm, even guinea pig farming, because it's extremely common.
Guinea pig farming.
Yes.
Of course, that's big in Peru.
It's extremely big in Peru. It's actually common, and it's there's a lot of benefit actually for guinea pig farming in Peru. But we won't go into too much detail into this here. But it's one fun fact that I always like to mention is, for example, I would ask like, okay, how do you decide like your milk? Like, why is the price $2.5? Like an example, and they would say, well, my competitors sell it 3.60, so I decided to put it 3.50. I'm like, so you have no idea if like you're making profit or you're losing money out of it. Like, have you calculated your cost of production? And so trying to explain to them like, how, okay, well, let's kind of include all your kind of raw material. How much does it cost to do this and that? So those were kind of some example of like how to make business cards to make sure that you socialize your enterprise and your small businesses. And so it was all of this aspect. And at the end, we created a book and we did some trainings, and there was a major kind of event at the end to congratulate those producers that kind of made it through this program.
That's really, really cool. That's mine's not nearly as exciting as yours is. So my most interesting job on my CV was I taught scuba diving. I mean, it's unusual. It's not something that everyone can say they've done. I taught scuba diving in central Indiana, which is even more confusing because people think, well, where would you scuba dive? We have rock quarries and they're very cold. They have a thermocline at 15 feet where it is always like 60-degree water year round, no matter how hot it gets outside. In a rock quarry that's filled with water under 15 feet, it's the same temperature. So we'd go diving even in the middle of winter.
I would not. I love scuba diving. I would have never, and I'm from Canada, I would have never followed you in the Midwest in the winter of Indiana. Never.
I mean, let's be honest. Scuba diving in the Caribbean, very enjoyable. Everyone wants to scuba dive in the Caribbean, but scuba diving in Indiana, you have to really want it.
Yes. And I would assume the fish are not as colorful as the one we would see in Caribbean.
I mean, there's some colorful fish down there. They're very friendly fish. They want to come and see what you're up to. So, all right. Well, let's get back to our topic today, which is supporting women in the supply chain industry, or just in business in general. I mean, the supply chain industry does have a historically male population, but supporting women in the workplace can get complicated really, really quickly, and it can have a polarizing effect. So I want to make sure that we really approach this with a mature mindset. But there are some ways that companies can really support the women in their organization, and I want to talk about why it's so important first. Now, you and I were discussing some. Let me back up. You and I were discussing the Lean In report on women in the workplace. So this was a report that was done by leanin.org and the McKinsey Institute, and they surveyed hundreds of companies thousands of women talking about their experience working in the workplace. And one of the pieces of information that we found was that women in leadership is a particularly soft area. That's one of the hardest places for women to get into. So once you get out of that entry level role and try and get into those leadership roles, that's where women start to experience more of the difficulty in the workplace. And again, especially in supply chain, what are some ways that we can get women into those leadership roles?
And it's a good topic. And just, I was also reading some statistic about it. I think there's a 2019 Gartner report that specifically women in supply chain, across all, it's 39%. When you get to a leadership, executive leadership, it's only 11%. So what happened between the first 39% to the 11? I'm engineer. I love the numbers. And what happened at this point?
Why are women, stepping out of leadership roles?
And so it's not an easy question. I think if it was an easy fix, we would have fixed it years ago. I think there's multiple aspects to it. I unfortunately think that there's still a lot of unconscious bias. Nothing malicious, never that I've faced, but there's still a lot of unconscious behavior, either based on comments, reaction, during hiring, for example, is also another one that we could see. Some example of this that I've seen, for example, is this woman is going on maternity leave. And I had an executive person coming to me and saying, oh, this person is probably never going to come back to work. Like, she's going to become a mom. Well, it might be true for some women, but I know personally a lot of women who desire having a leadership role and who desire having a career and a family in parallel. And so we need to be we need to be careful with those bias, because we assume, and then that woman kind of think that this is how she needs to behave, when it's probably not true. She could have wished for, or she rewind. I don't even know what I was going to say.
Women who have been asked that question, or it has been assumed that they won't want to come back.
So yes, so those women which we assume, but we never really ask them, and then they can feel that this is the only path forward when it is not. There's a ton of option there. There's a ton of role and possibility that are feasible. And so I think that we need to have an honest conversation, and we need to also make sure that those unconscious bias doesn't stop women from going up and up the ladder as they continue their career.
Yeah, you make a good point, because we were talking earlier about when it comes to families, and families have moms, they have dads, they have both genders, and both moms and dads work. So why is it okay to assume that a woman is going to abandon her career because she has a family, while the men can assume that that's never going to be an issue that affects his workplace productivity or his
promotion,
attendance, devotion to the company? Yeah, that's never a question when it comes to men in leadership roles, but it's always a question when it comes to women. And I know that we've experienced that there's been a dramatic shift, especially in the past few years, where more men are blocking out on their calendars when they have their kids' soccer game, or they need to pick up their kids from school, or there's a field trip that they want to chaperone, all of these types of things where the men are being more proactive about doing these things with their families. And we are a very family-friendly organization. But then the question still comes up when a woman, is going to become a mother of, are you coming back? Well, why wouldn't I come back? You can go to a soccer game, and it's not, a question of whether or not you're coming back. Yes, it's different. Having a child is different than going to a soccer game, but having a family is a lifetime commitment. And so is having a career, if you want it to be.
No, fully agreed. And I did really appreciate because in the past it used to be like, oh, I have an appointment or I have a conflict, and I do appreciate when men and even more at higher position come and say, I need to pick up my kids, or my kids is sick, I need to stay home. I think that when you
Mm-hmm.
verbalize and you use the real reason behind it, and you're not, maybe not ashamed,
Hiding.
but not
Mm-hmm.
hiding it, or like kind of, then it showed everybody else that it's okay to take the time for your family. It is okay to put some time your career or some time aside, or have the flexibility to like prioritize your family at this moment. And you can always be back at work later or the next day, that the company offer this flexibility. And when you have those role models, I think that's what creates a huge difference.
Yeah, it does make a huge difference to show, even for just younger or lower positions,
Yep.
to show that, hey, our leaders care about this. This is important to them, so it can be important to me too.
Yep.
Well, and it's not just about children in the workplace. Women are frequently behind men in terms of the way that they are perceived in the workplace, regardless of their familial status. So, one of the things that I was reading in this study from leanin.org was that, as you were saying, the microaggressions are causing women who are already in leadership roles to leave some of those leadership roles. And one of the quotes from it is, implications or other colleagues assuming that a woman in a particular role is not qualified for that role, or that she is more junior than she actually is in the company, and referring to her or talking to her in ways that are a little bit demeaning. Not intentionally, just saying, oh, well, could you take care of the plants, or could you empty the dishwasher, could you, get those dishes taken care of, or could,
Well,
oops, no worries.
we're going to need to cut this.
Of course we
Sorry, I
will.
tried to put my legs up and. Uh,
You just let me know when you're good.
okay. Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Okay.
All right. So some of these microaggressions that are not intentional, but things like, could you water the plants in the office? Could you take care of, making sure that the coffee is stocked up? Or could you clean out the refrigerator? There's something that smells in there. All of these things that they just assume is, what a woman should be doing in general. And therefore, it should translate over to the work environment as well. Whereas that lunch is probably some gentleman's lunch, or it might be that, the plants are taken care of by a service, or whatever, but that's not necessarily a woman's role in her job duties.
Which, yes, I fully agreed. And it's also where you can see that you go above and beyond what is in your task description. And that's what one thing we were talking earlier is that women typically are going to do more than what is just on their job description. And you were mentioning, for example, that some of those jobs may not even be recognized in your end of year performance review, because who's going to give you bonus based on how much you water the plants? Like, it's not something that has a direct impact on the business, which I fully agree. Like, we need to make sure it's efficient, but creating an environment of inclusion, creating an environment to make sure that everybody feels comfortable, creating an environment where a lot of my role is to talk to people and make them feel that they can trust me, that they can come to me if there's something. And that takes a lot of time to build those relationships. And it's not a direct link to profitability, or it's not a direct link to revenue. Like, I'm not hitting one of those targets, but
Yeah, that's not billable hours.
it is not. But it is important, because how do we retain people? How do we make sure that they feel comfortable? How do we make sure that they feel that they have somebody who has their back? And this is a lot of effort, and this is a lot of time to generate those relationships. And it's above and beyond what we would typically see in job description, for example.
And the women tend to be those mother hens. Just in general, we're a little bit more acclimated to that role, but it tends to happen if, and especially if, the men push it onto women. But we tend to just do those things. I know I
Oh
do.
yeah.
Um, I I water the plants in the office.
I call
But
myself a mama bear. I protect all the women in this company. Like that's my role. I'm a mama bear.
and so none of those things are on our annual reviews in terms of is this one of the skills that I've developed this year, or is this something that is going to improve, getting employees into the office to work instead of working remotely. How are we going to build that culture? It's a very soft skill that we're doing that's not necessarily on the path to a management promotion. And so women have to be very careful when they're taking on these things that are maybe even not even asked, but they just see that a need is there and they decide to do it. Is this going to help your career? Are you going to advocate for the fact that you've been doing this? Are you going to bring this up to your own boss and say, hey, this is something that I have taken on and I feel that this needs to be recognized? There's a lot that women can do in order to speak up for themselves and really promote their own, what's the word I'm looking for? Promote what they do and what they bring to their job and their company, and make sure that it's recognized. And I think that was another thing we were talking about is with you being the mama bear and protecting women, but how do we also support them and teach them how to do these things?
Yeah, and mentorship and role model and mentorship, I think it's a huge topic, which it's a broad topic. And how do you develop this? I think there's multiple ways of doing it. I know, for example, one example for me is first time I went to a trade show. I had somebody coming to me and saying, can I talk to one of your project manager or engineers? And I was like, oh, I'm an engineer. And his first reply was like, you're way too pretty to be an engineer. Laughing. No malicious intent, but just kind of laughing.
Yeah, just off the cuff.
Yeah. And I was like, well, this is really, and I don't have my tongue. What is the expression? What is the expression? I don't have.
Oh, the cat's got your tongue.
Oh no, I'm not shy of talking loud. I'm not shy.
Oh, okay. That I don't know.
Okay, well, let me find I'm not scared of speaking up. And okay. So my first reply was, well, that's really like, you shouldn't be saying this. Like, this is inappropriate. Like, why can I not be both? And why does my physique has anything to do with what I'm actually doing as my profession? And so since this moment, every time I went back to trade show and every time we would bring additional women, I would be on the lookout. I will tell them like what they can expect, what they shouldn't expect, like what they cannot, what they shouldn't,
what they should not, deal with.
Exactly. And like, if something happened, that they have the possibility to come to me, to come to any executive, everybody's going to have their back, but also that they have the possibility of speaking up, even if it's a potential client. Oh, this guy is maybe a potential VP of this guy or this girl. Be mind this, I'm using a sexist gender right now. This person, this person is a potential client. That doesn't mean that this is acceptable. That doesn't mean that those microaggressions, as you call them, are acceptable. And so this is one of the example of mentorship or coaching that, like, I was like, you have the right to set your own boundaries. And anyway, you have the right to set up your own boundaries and to speak up for yourself. So this was one example. But even within the workplace, as we said, again, the executive, our role, the number of women into executive leadership position is less. It's only 11%, as Gertner was mentioning. And so those are more rare example of who you can have a mentor to support you. And so one of the example I like is one of my clients. The reason why they hire us is that when we did the pitch, there was 5 or 6 other vendors, and we the only one that came up with 2 women on our actual project teams. And I was going to be the project manager, and this is not the sole reason why they hire us. But one of the reasons, she's like, I really appreciated that I was going to be working with other women in this industry. So it was kind of a rewarding feeling and like kind of thing, gratifying to see that like this was recognized. And so I have been working with this person for over 10 months now, and I appreciate so much to see somebody in this position. She's leading she's in a cross-functional role, and so being able to deal with kind of different type of workforce and different type of personality, and being really frequently in a room of the only woman with 10, 15 men in the room, and being able to speak up and assertive and be funny at the same time, because, you need to be witty at the same time, because if you're too direct or too harsh, it's also going to be used against you. And
Right.
so being able to like, hey, this is inappropriate, or, oh, be careful where you're going with this. She's been a really good mentor for me in seeing that this is possible and how to manage those microaggressions. Is, I would say, it's been really insightful for me.
And having a mentor is sometimes difficult to find that person who's going to mentor you. I think that when it comes to professional mentors, often you find them outside of your own company, just because I know in my case, my role doesn't exist otherwise within our company. So I have to kind of create it myself, and or talk with someone from another company, like you were just saying. But when it comes to mentors within our company, we also want to have those individuals who are on our side, who have our backs when it comes to a lot of these things. Like we were talking about those soft things that don't get put onto a performance review or a growth plan, where you can have that mentor who's got your back, who's speaking up for you when something happens, when someone makes an offhand remark that they don't realize is really hurtful or misogynistic or sexist, that we can have that comfort level of someone standing up for you behind your back and saying, no, that's not okay. That's not the way we treat our colleagues. Or, that's a non-issue whether or not she's going to, start this project right before she goes on maternity leave. We've got backfill for that. Why would you not want to put her on this project just because there's going to be, a part in the middle where she's not fully on board? That doesn't mean that we don't need her expertise at the beginning and then again at the end. We really do need to make sure that we are advocating for those individuals, and screaming it from the top of the mountains, because we want women to be involved in our industry. And I have to bring up the fact that you were listed as one of Supply and Demand Chain Executives Women in Supply Chain this year.
Thank you.
So yes, you were named as part of that list. It's not technically an award; it's just a recognition of some of the top women in our industry. And one of the things that they said on their website about this particular reason for this list was, the greater diversity within an organization, the more viewpoints that are tapped to tackle a problem or create a strategy. If one demographic makes up the C-suite or board of a company, there's a much narrower lens through which the company can assess and handle an issue or create a plan. And I think that's so true. When you live in a little echo chamber, even a small echo chamber as small as a C-suite within a company, that non-diversity of thought is going to directly impact what your company is able to achieve. And so bringing in these other viewpoints of women who have families, women who are, mature in their career, women who don't want families, but women with all these different experiences are going to give these companies different perspectives on their product, on their processes, on the way they go to market, the way they work with their suppliers and vendors. It's going to impact these companies greatly if they're willing to accept and tap in to the resources that they have available instead of alienating them.
And so in my role, I'm in charge of recruiting all senior talent, and we already had struggling. It's the war of talent is real, and everybody I've talked to, multiple suppliers, clients all over, like it's an issue for everybody to recruit and to retain those talents.
Yeah.
And so if you think about that, you already that it's a war, and let's say you already have conscious bias, or you're looking at only a certain type of profile, you're reducing this pool of talent so much more. So if you're able to kind of broaden your space and tap into a much larger workforce, and with having different point of view, sometimes we recruit based on technical skills, but we estimate the soft skills of somebody. That can be teaching
Mm-hmm.
them the technical might be faster than teaching them the soft skills of a job.
Right.
You know what I'm talking about. So
Yes.
if you tap into this larger, if you don't kind of reduce this pool, but you actually tap into a much larger, then that's where you have much more greater chance of finding the right person, or the unicorn I typically call. So this is one point. The second point that I really like is supply chain used to be really siloed. You would have transportation, you would have manufacturing, you would have warehousing, you would have procurement. And we've been seeing, and even more in the last years, how you need to integrate those processes. You need to have a much better understanding of what's happening before and what's going to happen after, because the consequences on one aspect is major throughout the full value chain. And so I think having this blend of talent, the skills of collaboration, having a much more understanding of the overall processes is extremely important. And those skills are, and also being a facilitator, being able to negotiate, being able to give in and, what's the expression? Give in and give out?
Give and take.
So having also those roles where you can give in and take, it's extremely critical right now, because that's how you're going to have an efficient company. And so those are roles that like women can succeed in it, that are doing a lot of giving and taking, that are having a really strong communication skill. So I do think this is also kind of a big potential for women in supply chains.
I agree. And one other thing that we were talking about in regard to managers and mentors really supporting their workforce, and this is something that it has absolutely nothing to do with whether or not you're male or female, but the remote workforce is such a pervasive part of our workforce now, where people are having hybrid work from home, work from the road, work from some tropical location if they're lucky, and then a couple days in the office. But some people maybe don't have any face time in the office. But in historically management type trainings, we're taught how to manage a team who's present, who exists, who sits at a desk. And the management training has not quite adapted or trickled all the way down into, how do I manage a remote team? How do I support a remote team? And one of the things that the study and a number of other articles have pulled in is that women are typically the roles, or they're the person who goes for that hybrid or that remote opportunity, because it makes childcare easier, because it makes taking care of a family or other obligations, whether it's, maybe you're dealing with aged parents, that type of caregiver role, it makes that so much easier if she can do that from a remote location. But if your manager is only worrying about the people sitting in the office, that kind of leaves you out in the cold. So having that management training of, how do I effectively coach? How do I effectively delegate? How do I effectively, work with this person who is remote and continue to develop them? Just because they're out of sight does not mean they're out of mind and they're not important to the team.
It's an extremely good point. And I think that's a good point on onboarding and coaching and training those managers. I think we went from 180. We went from full-time in the office to full-time remote, and now having this flexible approach. And we've never really sit down and coach our manager on, what do you do when you think an employee is actually maybe not doing his 40 hours because he's at home and you don't see it? How do you manage something that it's getting harder to see? And so one of the points that I like about this is typically how to address hard conversation, how to have those a bit conflictual, how to manage conflict. Not doesn't mean that you need to be in a fight or screaming, but having those hard conversations mean that it's going to be uncomfortable, that you might have some pushback, but still be able to retain this employee, motivate this employee at the end, because you don't want to also lose this engagement. And
Right.
So how to have those conversations to be able to motivate this employee and get an alignment and the same vision between your manager and your reports. And I think that's kind of coaching that we haven't had. I fully agree with you that we went from one to the other one, and we've never actually had the time to sit down and talk to our manager and say, look, this is how we should be, this is how you should be having conversation with your employees. This is how often you should probably be checking on them. Like, how do you make sure that you create the same united vision remotely is a really good question. But talking about flexibility, because flexibility is also a one way to improve women in the company. But I also think rethinking our leadership roles, and this is both male, female, like all included. We typically see executive leadership doing 60 hours on the road, working hard days and nights.
Hmm.
We need to start thinking about somebody at 80% of our time, maybe traveling once a month, but being more present in the office. Can she or he bring as much value to the company? And are we ready to maybe kind of see this as a future leader, even an executive leadership? Can you have an executive leader at 60% of his time? Is it something that companies are ready to invest and would be able to see the value that this person can still bring in the company? So that I think that's a question that I'm interested in seeing, like, how can we rethink the way of executive leadership looks like our roles?
Yes, I agree. And I think that the more we get these female viewpoints into the conversation, the more we're going to come up with the creative solutions, that there's not a one size fits all to the way a company is organized or the demographics of their workplace. We just need to make sure that we are including different viewpoints, or perhaps we're asking, does this work for this type of individual? Is this a good enough solution, or do we need to make it more flexible? So I agree. If it were easy, like you said at the beginning, if this were easy, we would have solved it already. The fact that we're still working on it means that we've got a little bit of work to go. But I think as a society, where we have come so far in terms of supporting women in our workplace, and we've got a little bit further to go until we're all the way there, but we are on the right track, I believe.
I do agree. I do agree. And we're working a lot with making sure that we retain, that we also um, our high potential, that they believe that they have a place at this company, that
Exactly.
we nurture, that they can trust, that they can grow. I think this is also something that we've been working really hard to make sure that they can see their potential, and that's something we've been working a lot with the women. I'm going into circle. We could be deleting this. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this. Are you trying to conclude the conversation right now, or are we still continue talking?
We can conclude if you've got to go.
No, not at all. I don't have I think my
Okay.
call at 2 p.m. got canceled.
Okay.
I thought you were going to conclude, so I didn't know where to go. Let me restart over.
Okay.
Let me make sure. Okay. And yeah, so where were we? What were we saying? What was I saying?
We were talking about we've come a long way, and we've still got a little bit of work to go, but we're going in the right direction.
Um, and yeah, so what we realize is also a lot of our a good portion of our high potential in the company are actually women. And so how do we make sure that this talent can be transformed into future leaders in the company, and that they make sure that we retain them and that they stay and that they see a path forward? And so this is only what we realize is that a lot of them might be more self-conscious, being less of a advocate for themselves, sometimes
Mm-hmm.
trusting a bit them less their kind of their influence in the company, or even their own talent or competence. And so that's something that we like, no, you need to believe in yourself. Like, you're doing good. And like, we've been like building some individual plans of like, here's where we see you in 5 years, here where we see you in 10 years. And we do believe that you could get this if this is what you desired. Here's the path there, and we're going to be supporting you. And this is not only me, this is the full company. All the company, men, women, diversity, everybody who's trying to support this, to make sure that like we can have those high potential transforming into future leaders in our company. And so also kind of trainings on how women can be more assertive and be making sure that they stand up for themselves. And when you're in a room of 10, 15 men and you're the only woman, and sometimes it can be feeling a bit
Intimidating.
yes, thank you. I was looking for the word. And so how do you make sure that like you really need to have strong trust in your competence and what you're going to say. So sometimes it's a bit more kind of, oh, I'm not going to say this until I'm 90% sure of what I'm saying it, instead of like, no, like if you're 75% sure, like go, and like you can always, there's a way to bring it up. Erase this. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I've read something similar, that men are more likely to speak up with an idea just off the cuff than women are. Women will wait until they know more facts. They will wait until they are absolutely sure of what they're about to say before they will speak up for themselves with an idea, with a concept, and so that hinders them in their own career. Just their lack of self-confidence in what they bring to the table, what they bring to the company, what they bring to their position, what they bring to their role, and what influence they can have on the way things are done.
Mm-hmm. Which, we're going back to mentorship. I think that's where mentorship has huge value in the company. And again, when we mean mentorship, it doesn't need to be woman to woman. It can be, I had some really strong mentors in my life that was men that I know would have my back and are listening to my point of view and are gonna work through any challenges I would have with me. So yeah, I agree. Mentorship is also something that going back to is bring a lot of value in the company.
All right. So on that note, I think I need to sign up to be a mentor, because apparently young women in the industry need this. All right. Any closing thoughts before we take off?
I was not ready for this question.
Oh, okay.
Where can I finish this?
Let me see.
Maybe.
All right, let's back up and I will let's delete that right there. All right, so most companies say that managers have been expected to do more over the last 2 years to support employees' well-being and advancement and promote inclusion on their teams. So knowing that managers are expected to do more, and their well-being is top of mind, that they're feeling all of this inclusion that we were just talking about, that they're feeling a valued part of that team. I think that means that we're on the right track. If we're saying that managers are expected to do more, we just need to support those managers, whether they be male or female, in trying to bring this inclusion to the forefront and make sure that it is a living, breathing part of their organization.
And I fully agree. It is a responsibility of everybody, up and down, right and left. Inclusion should be always kind of first thing we think of during hiring, during developing talent, during promotion, during retaining, and also thinking about how to make sure that we challenge ourselves during unconscious bias. And that's where, like, if you create a culture of openness and direct feedback in a respectful manner always, but that you have people that can challenge you, like, are you sure this is what you should have said? Or are you sure this is what you should thinking? And like, if you do create this environment of trust and that people feel comfortable to speak up in a respectful manner, again, I think that's where you can challenge unconscious bias, and then that's where you can evolve into a much more diverse and inclusive culture and environment.
All right. That sounds fantastic. Ideal. That brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you so much, Emilie, for joining me today and sharing your experiences and your perspective on women in our workforce, and specifically in the supply chain industry. I hope our listeners enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. I'd love to keep the discussion going. Do you have a similar experience or a differing opinion on how to support women in the supply chain industry? Let me know your thoughts at podcast@miebach.com. Or if you have a suggestion for another topic, or if you'd like to be a guest on our show, you can reach me at, again, podcast@miebach.com. As always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you enjoyed the show, please rate us on whatever podcast platform you prefer. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google, or Spotify, and be sure to tune in next time.